love of God, man, I want to be a resentful taco delivery boy. There's a real hell on earth. You know, I had a guy come up to me.
We'll drink and drink and drink till there's no more drink and drink to save his love. The known universe, fully invented, philosophical notions.
You've left yourself an absolute mess.
Michel Foucault was a genuine pervert, and it made him awful sad. He invented philosophical doctrines designed to drive us all quite mad. Critical racists now annoy us. They accuse and satirize, multiplying all around us. It's time we cut them down to size. We'll drink and drink and drink till there's no more think and think like this. Saviors of the known universe, for they invented philosophical notions, deconstructed in every way. Dr. Ritter, battle joker, stuck a poker in our eyes, tried to challenge ancient wisdom. All he did was demonize.
All right. I am Ben Burgis. This is Give Them an Argument. I am joined as always by our super producer, Jake Appett, and our very talented graphic designer, J. Andrew World. We are also joined today by Jason Myles from This Is Revolution, Separation Magazine columnist, author of very shortly forthcoming pamphlet, I Was a Teenage Anarchist. And he is going to be doing a book launch for that in the San Francisco Bay Area. We're going to be talking more about that in just a minute. But what you just heard was a friend of the pod, Jordan B. Peterson, launching an exciting, I guess this is the beginning of his music career.
I don't know what that was. I can honestly say, I think this is you getting back at me for showing you all those weird videos. In the champagne room.
I mean, this is the second song he's put out that I know of.
He's got another. I don't need to see the other one. I'll take
the other one's actually pretty good. Like, honestly, it's got like this Tom Waits kind of vibe to. Although it's like this dark thing.
So this one, I just cannot emphasize this enough. This is not somebody like putting together a clever parody of him or something with AI. This is a video that Jordan Peterson put out himself. This is on his YouTube page. There are, just because it manages to be so much stranger than any of the videos along these lines that people make to make fun of him. There are various figures like Godsad and, people like that who have cameos in this video. This is a whole thing. So that was just the beginning. I am going to inflict the rest of it on you. You have the.
This is a get back for making you watch the gangbang video, huh?
Richard Rorty. Gordo! Is truly not helpful.
Is truly not helpful.
With his assurance nothing's real.
Call me pig.
With his assurance nothing's real.
What of hunger?
What?
What of hunger?
Mr. Skeptic.
Mr. Skeptic.
When it child lacks a meal.
What's the hunger to celebrate it as a sage who proclaimed that sex was raping? She's a model for our age. D'Angelo, known as Robin, is she a disgrace to amaze? Crucifying us, or so she proclaims. It's time we put her in her place.
Yeah, poor cat.
Yeah, this is I think the best comment that we just saw go by there in the chat was the who is this for? Just like a really interesting question. But
The gangbang video was way better than this.
well, all right. So you know, Jason might be giving people a misleading impression. He keeps using the phrase the gangbang video. Makes it sound like they're sitting around in the champagne room of TIR watching actual videos of gangbangs.
And also,
Uh,
I'm unclear on what's so unpleasant about that. That sounds
About the gangbang?
well. I'm guessing it's not what we think it is because what you're
Well,
describing sounds.
apparently,
It is what I thought it was.
what it actually
Didn't sound
is a video of like some woman on TikTok talking about how empowering she finds them. That was
See, okay. I feel like we could do without the metatextual review afterward. It's like, okay, that sounds pretty terrible.
yeah.
Like reading an academic paper would be hell on earth. The thing itself,
Yeah. How could you?
It's
How
the
could
reason
you
for
turn,
living, right?
How could you turn this experience into something incredibly irritating?
I mean, he ended it with saying he's going to put Robin DiAngelo in her place. I was like, oh, okay.
So yeah,
that was interesting.
It's
yeah.
intense.
Is that a threat?
It kind of sounded like a threat, and he also the rhyme there was the disgrace to a race. So I don't know if he means Italian people or what's going on there. I don't like Robin DiAngelo very much, but I don't really know that she's in the top 10 most objectionable Italians.
Just kidding.
Like, why is he mad at Ta-Nehisi Coates? Like, that dude's been out of the picture for so long. Does he hate Black Panther, the comic book, that much?
Probably.
But yeah,
I mean, he's just kind of listed off all of the people who are like academics or writers who he hates, I guess, which is actually interesting that he didn't throw Marx in there somewhere. That being like one of his classic obsessions. He just does the postmodernists and like modern, like race and gender people he doesn't like. But yeah, I feel like whatever else you want to say about that, I mean, that is a pretty, it's a pretty direct window into Jordan Peterson's soul right there. That we just saw. There's like a little bit of like weird, ambiguous quasi-fascism with the rhyme about Robin DiAngelo. There's this like list of these like writers and intellectuals he's obsessed with hating. There's there's a suggestion like, so at the end, it seemed like taco delivery boy Jordan Peterson, and that was the whole thing, right? That he was it was because he was like stuck in this demeaning working class job because he hadn't listened to Jordan Peterson's self-help advice and thus risen to a better position in life, which is why he was sitting around watching TV and drinking. Although also at the end, he seemed to be putting on like a, like a Antifa kind of looking kerchief and then, a mask over it. Cause that's how the libs do. Like a COVID mask. And then it sounded like he was going out to, break some shit in the streets.
Right. Okay. I didn't. Yeah.
I gathered that. I thought the whole shit was the taco gulag thing made me chuckle because I was like, "What is a taco gulag?"
It sounds delicious.
That sounds like something they would have here, actually. That would be like a Silver Lake taco place, is the taco gulag.
Ben, did I give you the address for the vegan McDonald's in LA?
You did. I have not checked it out, but I
need you to go there and send that picture to Jordan Peterson.
We need what, 10 people to sign up for Patreon right now, or else we're just going to play that video on repeat until we get to
I hope that works. If that works, I'll do some fucked up shit on my channel. I need 10 more patrons, or I'm gonna show my ball bag on the internet.
Yeah, what are you gonna do? Stop watching?
But I think on that video, I like this. We watched some JP stuff when you were gone, Ben, and he has this kind of weird comedy thing that he's trying now, I think, or at least like sort of self-aware, sort of not. And he's not ultimately self-aware, which I think is kind of fascinating when it's like someone who isn't really self-aware is like kind of trying to satirize themselves a little bit or do humor. But I think the aesthetics of the video are a lot more interesting than the meaning of
the content.
Because once you laid out what the content is, it's literally just we didn't start the fire but like we did start the fire. But
it's very much like Crash Test Dummies, like 90s Canadian aesthetic.
Right.
I'm just saying Crash Test Dummies because that's what most people know. But look at the Ray Statics, Spirit of the West, which actually has a very similar oompa beat to their song Venice is Sinking.
There's some time signature changes. I like his dancing it's just very weird. It's I think there's the video is just a lot weirder than he intended, maybe. But
it's very much that 90s alt rock Canadian thing. That's
true.
It's a very much
super weird. It was easy to follow.
If you remember, one of the strangest moments in the Zizek Peterson debate was when Zizek was kept trying to get Peterson to tell a joke and he wouldn't do it. And, every time you do see Peterson, kind of revealing what he thinks is funny, it ends up being this, kind of disturbing window into his soul. It's oh, never mind. You know what? Don't tell jokes. Actually. On second thought.
Or write poetry. Like we read his poetry book.
Oh yeah, that was really unfunny and bad as well.
Yeah, which had a song that went along with that book.
Fair enough. Well, look, we started late because this ridiculous city that I've chosen to live in has unpredictable bad traffic. So it goes from 22 minutes to the studio 1 minute to 35 the next. But I want to make sure that we have time for this before we bring on Luke. So do we have a graphic for Jason's show?
We have two.
Well, hell. All right. So okay. So on November 18th at a undisclosed location in the San Francisco Bay Area, although if you get a ticket,
I sadly had to put the address to make the ticket. So it's in Fairfield, California.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Less exciting to say, but yes, Fairfield.
I know. Yeah.
Fairfield, California, November 18th. There is going to be this meet and greet. It's also a book launch for Jason's pamphlet, I Was a Teenage Anarchist. I'm going to be there. I will, I don't know, I'll introduce him and, say 2.5 things and then just kind of hang out probably for the rest of the evening. But also, I assume that'll be the highlight for most people, but just in case it's not,
Just in case.
who else is gonna be there?
I wanted to do something kind of cool and a little different than just reading something of your book in front of people or at a bookstore. And me and another friend who is a luthier, so he builds guitars and also does some tech work for tons of bands, mostly of course in the Bay Area. We kind of have some mutual friends in the scene, and he really liked the book, and he said, why don't we do this thing where we have some guys come out, you interview them, like these guys love talking to you anyway, Jay. So Chris Contos, who's the original drummer of Machine Head, Attitude Adjustment, he's in Forbidden now. Another group with Craig Cisco called the Boneless Ones, which actually is an old group that they were in back when they were kids in the 80s. Rick Hunolt from Exodus, the original guitar player of Exodus, if you know that band. A lot of metal and punk guys. And then Craig LeCicero, original guitar player of Forbidden, and he was in Man-Made God. He was in Death for a while, one of the original death metal bands. So it's going to be me talking a little bit about the book, I Was a Teenage Anarchist, and then definitely talking with these guys. They have some kind of awesome stories. I've known these cats for a while. So then we're going to have a Q&A. So once we're done yapping our gums, then everybody can ask questions. It's going to be in some, I don't want to say tight quarters, but like an intimate setting, I think is the best way to explain it, which is something also I wanted. Nice.
Yeah, I saw somebody in the chat asking about the date and time and all. Well, the date
November 18th. Yeah, there's should be a link in the description to this show.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, if you want all that information, there is a ticket link down below the screen you're watching right now. Just keep scrolling down, and you will find a ticket link that has all of that information on it. But mark your calendar, November 18th. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be my first time in the Bay Area in many years. My younger brother went to college in San Francisco, and I spent like a summer there once. But I think that was like, my joke was going to be that was when Obama was president, but he actually wasn't yet. That was like
I think I was born.
That was still George W. Bush was president.
I was born during the Obama years, right? I think I was born in
that is the standard thing I always say.
No, you're not. You're you born during Clinton?
I think Clinton had just
91.
No, 91.
He wasn't in yet.
Okay, so 91, then it would be actually before Clinton because he was elected.
Wow. Yeah,
so George Bush Sr. Yeah, I see what you did there, but yeah. Yes.
It's not that you're that young, Jake. It's that we're all that old. Time is kicking us in the testicles real hard right now when we're realizing like 2013 was 10 years ago. Holy shit. That was the future yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah,
you'll be in the Bay Area at some point. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I was actually born during the final year of the Carter presidency. So
see what I mean? Time.
So yes, very, 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 very old. But in any case, that's Pac-Man, the Reagan administration, and me were all born in 1980, so it's a mixed bag. But in any case, so I haven't been to the Bay since 2008. So it's gonna be a lot of fun for me to
Oh wow, what a great way to come back. You're going to be in a room full of rock stars, telling really cool rock star stories. Allegedly, we're going to be recording it.
We'll see.
We wanted to live stream it, but I was like, let's see first, because these guys get to talking, and there might be some stories we don't want.
We don't want on YouTube.
Yeah. Sure. So I'm pretty stoked.
Yeah. Depending on what Ben snorts or doesn't snort, you might want to turn off the camera because that he might say some stuff.
Okay, I'm just going to remind Jake the NDA he signed when he started on GTA.
Sorry.
There are no Brooklyn podcasters here, man. Calm down.
Also true. All right. In any case, so we are. I think I said earlier that the JBP video was far stranger than anything that anybody puts out to parody him, which is true. But there is one of the parody videos I saw after this dropped that I did think was pretty funny. So we are going to play Jason out and Luke in with that.
Take care.
Sweat, baby, sex is a Texas drought. Me and you do the kind of stuff that only Prince would sing about. So put your hands down my pants, and I'll bet you feel nuts. Yes, I'm Cisco, yes, I'm Ebert, and you're getting 2 thumbs up. Coming quicker than FedEx, never reaching apex. Just like Coca-Cola stock, you are inclined to make me rise an hour early, just like daylight savings time. Do it now. You and me, baby, ain't nothing but mammals, so let's do it like they do on the Discovery Channel. Do it again now. You and me, baby, ain't nothing but mammals, so let's do it like they do on the Discovery Channel. Getting horny now.
I want to fuck. Getting horny now.
Well, I am
All right.
scarred for life now.
That's fair. That's fair. Well, I'm joined now by a resident of Canada that I might like even better than Jordan Peterson, Luke Savage, among many other things. Staff writer for Jacobin, author of The Dead Center. How you doing today, Luke?
I'm doing great, thanks. I mean, I was doing better before I saw whatever the hell that was. Aside from the animal videos that Peterson was watching there, what is the source material? What is that? What is that from?
Yeah. So if you go to we actually played this earlier, but if you go to Jordan Peterson's website, if you go to Jordan Peterson's YouTube channel, there's a video that he actually made himself of this song that's it's hard to describe, but it's a song with this video to go along with it that he's acting in, and that's they pulled most of that from. It's kind of him, this version of him who's drinking and watching a video and singing along to a song about how much he hates Judith Butler and Ta-Nehisi Coates and people like that. So honestly, the original is much stranger than any, as I said earlier, any of the things that people have made to parody it.
Yeah, I mean, I have heard some of the music that he made. He started doing these songs during lockdown that were they were anti-lockdown songs, and they're sort of oddly derivative of Wall era Roger Waters. Really, really weird stuff. It's funny how all these guys like Peterson just want to do entertainment.
Yeah, yes, this is true. I always think of that old Chapo joke about how much of right-wing punditry could be avoided if they just built a second fake Hollywood to give careers to everybody who couldn't make it in the first one. So I want to on that mention of Hollywood, actually. So I was looking at the last bunch of things you wrote for Jacobin, and I want to get to more recent stuff in a minute, but I thought it might be fun to start with a article that you wrote a little while ago about the state that I live in now, and our glorious leader Gavin Newsom, because this is something that ties in to one of the themes of the dead center and a lot of the writing that you've done about kind of contemporary American liberalism, which is that the sort of in like anybody, certainly, we were talking earlier about presidential administrations and who can remember what, but certainly anybody who remembers the Obama years will remember that the kind of party line was always that the Democrats want all the same things you want. You silly simpleton. It's not that they don't agree with you. It's not that they don't long for the same reforms that you do. It's just that these damn Republicans, they have too much power, and you can't do anything. And what do you think the president is? Green Lantern? Come on, grow up. There's just whatever can be done. The Democrats are doing. If they're not doing it, that means it can't be done. And as you point out, they, thinking about California politics is pretty interested in that light, because it's like, what Republicans?
Right. I mean, I think I believe I began that piece by citing something from Thomas Frank's book, Listen Liberal, which I think Frank argues this quite succinctly. I mean, he points out that, as you said, throughout the Obama era, there was this kind of Panglossian view that, we're always living in the best of all possible worlds. The Democrats are always being as progressive as like the forces of the cosmos will allow at any given time. And what Frank does is he says, well, okay, if that's true, let's look at contexts where Democrats don't face Republican obstruction, where they don't face gerrymandering, where in fact they're able to draw the borders of the districts themselves. Right. They have, super majorities. In some cases, they don't really face obstruction from the courts at the state level either. If the former view that I was just mentioning were correct, as Frank argues, places like Rhode Island, places like Connecticut, places like New York, places like California would probably be like, I don't know, fully automated luxury communism by now, right? And right. we know that that's not the case, for one thing, but we also know that in many cases, I mean, the case that article was about, Gavin Newsom vetoing unemployment benefits, that's an obvious case study of Democrats not only not advancing a progressive agenda, but in fact using the powers of high executive office to actually obstruct it. The example I never tire of is Andrew Cuomo in New York State, basically like reorienting party politics, like creating a special caucus that allowed caucus with Republicans so that he could pass austerity budgets in like a state where the Democrats had total control. I mean, what else do you say? It's ridiculous. The Democratic Party may be more progressive, whatever that word means, than the Republican on some issues. But that doesn't mean at all that the Democratic Party does not, in some areas, that it's not an impediment to progressive change itself. It so clearly is.
Yeah, I mean, so the immediate example you just mentioned was, we talked about at the time, but it's maybe worth rehashing for just a minute, is that Newsom vetoed a bill that would extend unemployment benefits to striking workers, which is actually something that already exists in a couple of states. I think New York actually has that, but in this was something that was passed by a big margin in the state legislature. It's sort of self-evidently would be a huge boon to the bargaining power of union workers in California. And it's something that was inspired by when, and of course the actors strike is still going on, but when the writer's strike was happening, there were studio executives that were very openly saying, our strategy is just to keep this going until people start being evicted from their apartments, and then they'll be willing to accept our terms.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, they've been, I believe the quote was, the end game is to allow things to drag on until union members start losing their apartments and losing their houses. So in the context of this massive labor action where the management side had been quite explicit that they were just, like this was a war of attrition. They were just going to wait out the striking workers. yeah, he intervened to veto this thing that had a huge Democratic majority behind it. I mean, again, what do you even say?
Yeah,
It's
and not
it's
the
completely
certainly not the only.
indefensible.
Yeah, totally, and certainly not the only one instance like that lately. I mean, he also vetoed another bill that was passed by a big majority in the state legislature that would have required that driverless trucks have backup like human operators on board for safety, which of course vetoing that, most immediately sacrifices thousands of jobs, but also, not for nothing is should be worrying to anybody who drives on the highways here. And then he also had, when, around the same time, I mean, maybe completing the hat trick, he also, appointed to, after, Dianne Feinstein died, I'm told, I don't know how anybody can tell, but after she died, he, appointed this person to, fill the vacancy who is, who like helped Uber, do to get this awful measure that was passed in California, that basically makes it possible for Uber and other companies like that to continue to sort of sneakily classify people as contractors. They don't have to extend any kind of labor protections at all, even the minimum wage to their employees. And it's just like kind of one after another. It's like, okay, well, which Republicans made you do any of this?
Right. I mean, it's interesting when we think about, what is, I think, in many people's minds, and not for, for good reason, the kind of like signature anti-labor thing, right? It's right to work. And as far as I know, that's sort of, red states have been the principal kind of laboratory for that.
Yeah.
Although, of course, it was recently repealed in, Michigan as well. But
Yep.
Isn't it interesting that California has been the laboratory, the solidly blue state, has been the laboratory for so much of the most atrocious stuff around the so-called gig economy, right? I mean, I'm forgetting now the name of the proposition, that the gig companies put forward. I think it was at the time anyway, a few years ago in 2020, the most expensive, or 2021, the most expensive ballot measure in California history. Companies basically deceived people in terms of, telling them what they were voting for, all this kind of stuff. Well, the, foundational, document, the foundational essay, report, whatever we call it, behind that scheme was created by someone who served as Barack Obama's labor secretary. I'm forgetting now what the tie-in of somebody in Kamala Harris's family, possibly her sister, I'm now forgetting the details, was intimately connected to it in some way as well. I wrote about this for The Atlantic in a piece called "Liberals Are Choosing Convenience Over Workers." But I mean, right to work, as far as I know, again, is the product of red states. This, which is certainly the latest innovation in, a major anti-worker type of reform that gig companies are trying to, foist on the rest of the country as well. That didn't, that's not didn't come from, Kansas or Louisiana or Texas or somewhere like that. It came from deep blue California, which is governed by people like Gavin Newsom, by people who, use all the right language for things and talk about how much they love workers. And, I think that's interesting. And again, takes us back to Thomas Frank's thesis in Listen Liberal about, if Democrats are always doing, if we're always living in the best of all possible worlds, when Democrats are in charge, how do you explain, California or New York? I mean, you can't.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Okay, so this is more recently you've been writing a couple pieces about the other side of the aisle, and so really the two most dynamic and formidable figures in the contemporary Republican Party. The last two articles. There's Chris Christie, and of course there is that was the last one. And then before that, you wrote about unstoppable force of nature. Doug Burgum, probably the next president of the United States.
Oh man, I'm so glad you brought Doug Burgum up. I love this guy so much. Sorry, you probably want to ask me a prompt or something.
This is actually probably worth like, it's like the old Futurama joke with the, they have like the, Santa and the Hanukkah, whatever it is, and Kwanzaa bot, and the Kwanzaa bot is giving out the book called What the Hell's Kwanzaa? It's like, probably the question on most people's minds when they hear mention of him is, who's Doug Burgum?
Yeah, so Doug Burgum, if people have watched any of the Republican debates, he was in the first one. I believe that's the only one he qualified for. He is the governor of North Dakota. He is a sitting governor. He likes to boast about his background owning a software company before that. But the thing that's really interesting there's a few things that are funny about Doug Burgum. The way he made the debate threshold is that if you gave him, you had even in the Republican Party, you have to have a certain number of discrete donations of any amount to show like broad grassroots support, right? It was perhaps 40,000 or something. I can't remember the figure. And so what Burgum did is he said, if you give me $1, I'll send you a $20 gift card. He's personally wealthy. He's worth $1 billion or something like that. He's pumped in, I don't know, $12 million of his own money.
That is such a goofy detail. That's like, that's like if you put that in a novel or a movie, people like, come on.
Right. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, it's up there for, craziest ideas of this election cycle with Vivek Ramaswamy's idea that like people who fundraise for him should get a cut of the fundraising. Like he basically wants to turn fundraising into a pyramid scheme. Pretty good. But the thing about Burgum that is actually like, that I think is extremely funny. And the reason I wanted to write about him is that unlike Ramaswamy, who has all these crazy ideas, which, you've written about yourself with his like Starship Troopers-esque, idea about like military service, you got to do military service to be able to vote or something. But right. And the thing about that is, if you're a guy like Vivek and you're running for president, it's like, you might as well have some fun, right? You might as well toss out some crazy ideas. I figured when I looked into Doug Burgum, okay, this guy he's going to be like obsessed with the gold standard. Like,
right. That would make sense.
Or maybe he's a bimetallism guy. I don't know. Maybe he's more, maybe he's going to go from county to county talking about the coinage of silver. I don't know.
Somebody who's like poured all this money into getting such a tiny percentage of the vote, he must be an obsessive devotee of some cause. I mean, he must be like the half brother in Succession who's running for president.
Yes. But and that's kind of what I was expecting to find when I dug in. But no, if you go to Doug Burgum's website, which it's my homepage, I suggest you make it yours as well. He's running on like the most boring version of like the most boring drab paint by the numbers, like Chamber of Commerce conservative boilerplate. He has, I think, just 3 sections to his platform on his website. I think it's like energy, security, and economy. He's got some stuff about his business background. About time we have like some business experience. Haven't heard that one before. I'm going to just read you the entirety of his economic platform, okay? Because it's like 3 sentences. And I'm sure it'll give us some food for thought. The economy needs to be the absolute top priority. It's the main thing. A strong economy propels everything else and is the key to unlocking the best of America. Innovation has always been America's best weapon. Innovation over regulation is how you solve the challenges we face today. Regulation looks backward and innovation looks forward to the future, blah, 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 blah. Doug will get inflation under control, cut taxes, lower gas prices, reduce the cost of living, and help people realize their fullest potential. The most creative flourish on this page is in the energy section, where it says, as a governor and a business leader, Doug understands the future is going to be one at the intersection of innovation and energy. So I don't know what that means. It's kind of poetic, really. But I just looking at this, I mean, this is so incredibly funny to me because I love thinking that this is what having $1 billion can buy you. You're pumping tens of millions of dollars into your chaotic, like, just boilerplate conservative presidential campaign, and you can't even find some little bow tie dweeb from Stanford or Yale to pay like $100,000 to to do something, anything better than this. I love this guy. I'm gonna check his website every day. I hope he makes it into the next debate. I hope he invents a new Ponzi scheme. Oh, and by the way, like, having gotten to the debates, if people didn't watch it, like, he's a sitting governor, but like, he's the most awkward presence on the debate stage. He would constantly interrupt and talk over people to just like make a point that had nothing to do what people were talking about with what people were talking about. And then just like everybody else is just like, dude, why the fuck are you here? I love it. I love this guy.
Yeah, I mean, this is, okay, so on the one hand, this is the title of your piece, right? You said that this is like running, Bergen really shows that at this point you can run for president sort of more or less in the same way that you can like buy yourself into like a seat on the space shuttle or something, that
Yeah.
it's like just like this experience that's for sale at this point, and like you can even get into a debate they by selling $20 gift cards for $1 donations, and you can put yourself on the stage pointlessly, right? You don't have to even think that you have anything, or I guess you think you have something to say, but like it's like you don't, like there's just no pretense that you have anything that's interesting to anybody but yourself, and you can like, money will buy you that. You can put yourself there. But you do end the piece on a hopeful note that it's like there is also a sense in which this and several notable examples from the last couple cycles sort of show that even in 2023, oligarchy has its limits.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, other examples I can think of, Tom Steyer would be one.
Yes.
Another guy, I mean, Tom Steyer.
Google him, folks. If you've already forgotten that name.
Right. I mean, Tom Steyer never seemed like a malicious actor in the way that some of these other people are. But I mean, just like a rich guy who wanted to wanted to like meet Bernie Sanders or whatever. So it's like, yeah, sure. If I just spend enough of my own money, I guess I can do that. Or another Democratic no-hoper that people have forgotten about. Formerly one of the richest members of Congress. Actually, there's an essay about him in my book. John Delaney, who actually I think like entered the race like a full year before anyone else. Former congressman from Maryland. And he was spending tons and tons of money. He had like in early 2019, like had multiple field offices in Iowa and stuff, if memory serves. And of course he didn't make it to Iowa. But like John Delaney, who's like a multi-millionaire, was getting like 20 views on YouTube, I mean, incredible. And of course, right, the real case study in all this, and a truly malicious actor was Michael Bloomberg. And I was in some ways quite heartened by Michael Bloomberg's campaign, not the campaign itself, but its fate, because as with Doug Burgum and Bloomberg, I mean, we're talking about Bloomberg, we're talking about running on your own money scaled up to an extent that we had literally never seen before. And this is a guy who, as mayor of New York City, had like canceled programs and then funded them out of his like personal treasury and stuff. I mean, this is like a scale of plutocrat that's like just totally cosmic. Bloomberg turned on a tap. I mean, he's so rich that he was basically just spending like the interest or like some of the interest every week on what he makes, and it was like tens, or on what he owns. It was like tens of millions of dollars. And in the end, what did he get? Like a couple delegates out of American Samoa or something. And also when he made it into the debates, right? It turned out that it was just like all it took was Elizabeth Warren and a bunch of others just reading things that he like appalling things that he'd said, talking about like his litany of sexual harassment lawsuits and things like that. And it turned out that this guy is actually so rich that he's sort of just been able to skip small d democracy altogether. You know, he hasn't had to develop like basic retail politics skills. And when he's engaged in like rampant personal misconduct, he's just been able to like spend money to make it go away. But here he was on the debate stage in this presidential campaign where he's shelling out like obscene amounts of money, and it actually turns out that no, once actual democratic scrutiny is once he's subjected to that, it's over. There is no popular appeal to this. You can pay canvassers, which he did. You can buy like endless advertising, et cetera, et cetera. It does not make any difference. If people don't like what you're going to say or what you're saying, then as long as there's like even some like thin, liberal democratic mechanisms in place, you're not going to make it. And that is heartening, frankly.
Yeah. I mean, it's not great that we live in a society where plutocrats can, sort of buy their way into the process, but it is kind of nice that at the end of the day, they can't actually get people to vote for them.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So, so I guess, so we talked about the Democrats, we've talked about the Republicans, let's talk about the Likud party. Technically in a different country, but one that is whose relation has like a military whose relationship to American weapons manufacturers, for example, isn't noticeably different than the American military. And you recently published this interview about Bibi Netanyahu.
Oh there it is. This was an interesting conversation. If people aren't familiar with Ed and Germentum, I would recommend his Substack. He writes quite. He's a young guy, and he's writing quite perceptively about American politics and recently about the conflict in Israel and Gaza as well. There were a few pieces of his that kind of inspired that interview. By the way, if people want to listen to it, they can find the whole interview at patreon.com/MichaelAndUs, where I put up interviews that I do for Jacobin and other things for people to listen to. But that was a very interesting conversation about kind of the unique and formative role Benjamin Netanyahu has had in establishing Israel's political consensus. And also, Ed and Germentum advances the idea that basically the attack of October the 7th essentially is the end of the Netanyahu political consensus in the sense of it's the end of his career, certainly. He was a completely impregnable figure. The problem is that the country has been so, reshaped, and its politics have been so reshaped in Netanyahu's image that, as Ed and Germentum Josh says at the end of his piece, there's you look in the mirror and now there's just a whole bunch of mini Netanyahus looking back at you.
Yeah. So that, like, as much as, that last note you just ended on is, obviously not great. And so it suggests that, nothing particularly good will, come out of it if it is the end of Netanyahu's career. But it is still kind of a nice thought because it's so easy, certainly as Americans who, think about the way that after 9/11, George W. Bush was totally unassailable for a while, that, that he had, that the, by 2004, that was starting to, change a little bit, although not enough to carry the election. But I mean,
he won the popular vote in 2004, which he didn't do in 2000. So yeah, I mean, the mania around Bush lasted for quite a while, and that has not been the case, vis-a-vis this situation. If you look at the polling in Israel.
Yeah, right. Because it's like you think like, yeah, I mean, Bush, was like polling like 90% after 9/11, and he had, and there was enough of that left that he at least got the popular vote in 2004, which, as you say, he didn't in 2000, and that's kind of what you think of, right? That's like, okay, there's some sort of like, big shocking attack on the country, then people will rally around the flag, and in effect they'll rally around whoever's in charge. So why according to Editor Bentham is that not going to happen in this case?
Well, I guess just to ventriloquize a bit
Yeah.
his piece. Basically, the argument is that the consensus Netanyahu has erected, it was entirely about the idea that the Palestinian question, such as it is, doesn't have to be resolved. It can simply be contained, right? So you can split the Palestinians into Gaza and the West Bank, where settlement can be ongoing, and then you can surround the Gaza Strip with a security fence. Basically, you're not going to. You can set up the Iron Dome system so you can intercept any missiles or countermeasures that are fired from the Strip. And so essentially, right, allegedly, and so essentially, you don't have to think about this anymore. There's a kind of a regime of security that's now so impregnable that you can keep me, Benjamin Netanyahu, in power forever, and please don't kick me out of power, because then I'll go to jail because I've been indicted, etc. But basically, the whole thing was premised on, the crux of all of it was premised on, like, look, I may be a sleazebag, but I'm keeping you safe. The system keeps you safe, and recent events have shown that that's just simply not true.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it is, as much as it's like, I don't want to exaggerate the extent to which that's, good news, because that doesn't mean that, Netanyahu's going to be replaced by, some nice, some nice liberals who are gonna give us like a some reasonable version of a two-state solution or any of that stuff. I mean, like, that's clearly not in the cards. And in current Israeli politics, there is at least something slightly encouraging about like all of the horrors going on there, at least not salvaging this asshole's career.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, here there is, for talking about it, here there actually is a parallel, I think, to some extent, the discourse in America post 9/11, because what Edinger Mentum speculates, if people read that interview, is that basically Benny Gantz, who's, if there was an election held today, Benny Gantz, who's the leader of the opposition, would, or perhaps I'm actually now forgetting whether he's joined the National Unity Government. But regardless, he would win an election in a walk, previously leader of the opposition. And essentially, what he's promising is, or what he would promise is, like, I'm going to do the security stuff, but I'm going to do it smarter, And that reminds me of the Kerry campaign in 2004, right? Because John Kerry did not say the Iraq War was wrong, was premised on a lie, wouldn't have done it. He said, I would have got the UN involved. We would have built a big international coalition, a coalition of the righteous, and we would have taken out Saddam Hussein that way. And of course, it was incredibly ineffective, and the Democrats blew what was probably a winnable election. But there is definitely a parallel there, or could be, in terms of where what is supposedly the liberal side of Israeli coalition politics,
actually,
or at least the center of it may go.
Yeah, on that, right? I mean, since you've written so much about centrism, I do wonder, like, when you think about John Kerry in 2004, like, look, obviously, the last few weeks, I think, like many people in our camp, I've been probably more viscerally disgusted with most Democrats than I can remember being in a long time, because of what the atrocities they're backing in the Middle East. But there is a sense, right? In which in which these guys used to be worse, right? I mean, that there's like that.
Oh
If
yeah.
you think back to like the Kerry campaign, I mean, it's so easy to just like, I don't know, to just kind of forget everything that happened longer than a couple of years ago. But if you think back to the Kerry campaign, John Kerry, he'd voted for like every single major initiative of the Bush administration, the Patriot Act, No Child Left Behind,
Yeah.
Afghanistan wars,
Yeah.
his big, if anything, I mean, like,
He
you
was
were
running
talking
on
about,
his military record. Remember the whole thing about George Bush was that he wasn't a real troop, which John Kerry was. John Kerry reporting for duty. I mean,
yeah, yeah, like a lot of like, if you watch the Democratic convention in 2004, the whole thing was essentially a celebration of the Vietnam War, because
yeah.
that was John Kerry's like real troop
And
bona
amazingly,
fides.
right, Kerry had testified, I believe, was it at the Winter Soldier
Yeah,
hearings? Like
yeah,
he had
yeah, he did.
testified, and instead of running on like, oh, he has these anti-war bona fides, they were like, no, he's a troop. He loves war.
Yeah, they were like trying to make his Vietnam heroism the centerpiece of the campaign. And amazingly, even though it's how he got his start in politics, just kind of hope that nobody brought up his subsequent career as an anti-war activist when he got home. just as political strategy is just fucking amazing. And then yeah, his big objection to the Iraq War was that Bush hadn't sent enough troops to get the job done, right?
Right. Actually, incidentally, I mean, we don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but one of my favorite like centrist Democrat moves is when they
Ugh.
think that they're outflanking Republicans by just taking like an issue that is like 100% a Republican issue and then promising to do it smarter. Like I think of when Trump was doing all the stuff about like, we're going to build the wall, we're going to have Mexico pay for it. I remember like Chuck Schumer was like, we have no use for crude walls. We believe in smart security with like
Jesus.
drones and like laser systems. And like, it's like, yeah, Trump, I see your like, your draconian, like Hadrian's Wall. It's like, well, I'm picturing, I don't know, the security system from RoboCop or something like.
Wow. Yeah. Jesus Christ.
You're right. They're not. The Democrats. I mean, the response from the nominal opposition or the liberal
Yeah.
side of politics has not been as bad this time. I absolutely.
Yeah. No, I think that's actually, again, in many ways, that's actually right. That there has, like, there's a lot about the political terrain that's shifted since 2004 to make it, not nearly as bad, right? I mean, that there's so much of so much of what people are rightly pissed off at Biden about domestic politics is Biden not doing stuff. And it's like, yeah, I don't know, man. I remember, I mean, I'm old enough to remember when this, the stuff that Democrats were actually doing was like Bill Clinton's welfare reform acts.
Right.
And
right.
This,
Well,
like,
and it's important to register here. So if you want to get, I think another optimistic point might be, warranted here. But I mean, popular opinion on all kinds of things, foreign policy, domestic policy has shifted pretty considerably as well, right? Because we were talking off the top there about George Bush's approval ratings after 9/11. I mean, there were massive protests against the Iraq War, but there was genuine popular support for it.
Yep.
I don't know, I can't recall offhand if I've seen polling around, the big Clintonian domestic reform initiatives, welfare reform, things like that. But certainly if you go back to the 1980s and some of the things that, people like Reagan and Thatcher did, I mean, I don't know if they had majority support, but there actually was a kind of there was a kind of, I don't know, a populist or a popular foundation to some of those things. And I think what we see today is all of this stuff across the board. The neoliberal economic agenda, the neoconservative foreign policy agenda, whatever we're talking about, it's running on empty. There's not a lot of popular legitimacy, and even the institutions who are carrying out this stuff, as we've seen with these resignations. I mean, just to take one example, within the State Department, Biden staffers showing up to protests in DC, things like that. The whole thing's running on empty, and I think we can only find encouragement in that fact.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that, like, even though there are only 15 or 20 members of Congress who are talking about a ceasefire, which should also say on the subject of things getting better, would have been like a hilariously unimaginable number in 2014, right? I mean, it's like, try to imagine, 15 or 20 congressmen calling for a ceasefire, when Israel was bombing Gaza in 2014. Like, it just,
or in 2001, right? Barbara Lee was the only dissenting vote, in that sweeping, emergency powers resolution or whatever it was.
Totally, yeah. Yeah, exactly, right. There was one Barbara Lee then, right? And now, there are like well over a dozen on this, which is big encouraging, but it's actually less encouraging even than, it's a manifestation of, right, the shifts in popular attitudes that have gone much further. I mean, that there's 80% of Democrats, according to the Data for Progress poll, want a ceasefire, and 56% of Republicans do too, right? Which is sort of, in a way, shouldn't be surprising, because it's like, yeah, right. I mean, if people see like all these images of horrific violence, then whatever, their background assumptions might or might not be about Palestine and all of this stuff, and even if they might think a lot of things that you and I would disagree with, they'll at least be like, yeah, like, it would be good if people stopped killing each other. But it is surprising when you remember what the politics of this stuff were not that long ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I can only nod in agreement there.
Yeah. Okay. So I also take, when we're thinking about shifts in popular attitudes in, directions that we like, I always find it vaguely encouraging when people take the time to actually issue defenses of things that would have been just sort of, taken to completely go without saying, just in a sort of like, this is the waterway, before that. It's like, yeah, this is just like the air everybody's breathing politically, of course. And so along those lines, I think we have a screen share for this, so we can pause it. We have, there's somebody, there is Sabine Hossenfelder, is a German physicist, and she has a pretty considerable YouTube following as a science educator, and and I think she's supposed to be very good in that capacity. But she has recently branched off from explaining what quantum entanglement is to explaining why capitalism is good, actually. So let's take a look.
Capitalism will kill us all. That is, if you trust Greta Thunberg, which maybe you should not. Free markets will save us all, if you trust Robert F. Kennedy Jr., which maybe you should not. Maybe we should talk about what capitalism and free markets are. Will they kill us or save us? That's what we'll talk about today. Before we talk about capitalism and markets and stuff, we need to talk about money. I don't mean my money, though while we're at it, check out my Patreon. I mean money in general. What do we even need money for? Suppose you have an apple, but you'd rather have an egg. You ask your friend Sue, the one with the chickens, and trade an egg for an apple. Okay, but what if Sue doesn't want an apple? She'd rather have a banana. No problem. You ask your friend Joe with the bananas if he will trade your apple for a banana. Then you trade the banana for Sue's egg. Okay, but what if Joe doesn't want an apple either? He'd rather have new shoelaces. No problem. You ask your friend Mary if she'll take an apple for shoelaces. Give the shoelaces to Joe, take the banana, give the banana to Sue, and sure enough, you have your egg. It works, but honestly, that seems a little cumbersome. How about we instead trade something that everyone will accept, because they can exchange it for something else later, like gold maybe. I give some gold to Sue and she gives me an egg. Then she can take the gold and give it to Joe and get her a banana. That's much easier. Hooray, we just invented commodity money. All right, but now imagine you don't want to buy an egg, but an entire chicken farm. That would be a lot of gold you'd have to wheel around. So how about we instead, I don't know, print the face of a king onto a piece of gold and say it stands for an entire cart of gold? Come to think of it, why bother with gold? Let's just print it on a piece of paper. The paper itself doesn't have much of a value, but if we all agree on what it stands for, we can use it for trade. Hooray, we just invented token money. That sounds great, but the problem is if a lot of vendors just refuse to accept the money, it stops working. So in reality, token money is backed up by a king or a government, which enforces that vendors accept the money as payment. It's then called fiat money. Almost all money we use today is fiat money, except cryptocurrencies, but that's another story. Fiat money is fascinating because it's ultimately still based on trust. If all you guys watching this video freak out, exchange your entire US dollars for euro, and tell your friends to do the same, the US dollar would collapse. So don't do it. Several economists have argued that any community of sufficiently intelligent traders will eventually introduce a type of token money because it's the most efficient way to distribute resources. This idea was maybe first clearly formulated by the Scottish economist Adam Smith. All right, so we have money, but our busy traders still have a problem. Suppose you have a lot of apples and not sufficiently many people to buy them. Your amazing apples rot away. What a shame. You would like to make apple juice from them, but you can't afford a juice press, so your breakthrough innovation doesn't come into being. That sucks. However, your friend Sue has been getting really rich with all her chickens. So rich, in fact, she's sitting on a big pile of money that she doesn't know what to do with. Sue sees your problem and offers you a deal. She gives you some of her money so that you can buy your juice press. You just have to agree that if you get rich with your juice press, you give her the money back plus something on top. That money which Sue gives to you is your capital. And such was born the capitalist. The capitalist is a person or institution who provides capital to those who want to launch a new business, someone who's able and willing to take the risk that this capital will never have a return on investment. Today, we grow up with money and banks and all that, and we tend to take them for granted. And while money lending and a basic notion of financial debt date back thousands of years, capitalism and all the elaborate financial instruments that come with it is a surprisingly recent innovation. It didn't really take off until the Industrial Revolution 150 years ago, and it's dramatically
Jake, can we pause
changed
this?
the world. Scientists
I mean, I watched it beforehand and it kind of just goes on like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, I just want to what's the timestamp on this right now? I can't quite see there.
Looks like 4:53.
4:53. Okay. So we're like a good third of the way through this video that's allegedly about capitalism, and almost everything so far has just been about, money, which, this is, Sabine is an educator. I hope she knows this. Capitalism is a few hundred years old. Money has existed for thousands and thousands of years. Like, this is you're pretty seriously not on topic yet, if you're just like talking about money as a mode of exchange. I mean, did they have did they have capitalism in the Babylonian Empire? That they certainly had money. And I mean, all this stuff about money lending to like advance capital to start businesses, it's like getting us a little bit closer to is getting us a little bit warmer, right? But it's like it is just really funny. It's like, well, if you're just watching this so far, other than that reference to Greta Thunberg, who it's interesting because I only ever seem to hear her name these days when she's used as a sort of hate figure for various kinds of people who are punching left. But like, other than the reference to Greta Thunberg and that and some sort of implicit ecological worry about capitalism, you would really have no idea from watching this so far, like, why anybody would find any of this objectionable, right? It's like, which I mean, it's also, generally speaking, I mean, most socialists don't find most of what she's talked about so far objectionable because, she hasn't said anything about class yet.
Yeah, right. I mean, I don't know. Since we were talking about Bush era stuff, or actually since we began right off the top by talking about Jordan Peterson. I mean, I gotta say, having watched this whole video, what it really made me think of was, I think, an underappreciated fact about some of the new atheist people, which is, often they were people with science backgrounds who kind of made a name for themselves talking about politics, or by using, like, drawing on their scientific knowledge to talk about politics. And honestly, I mean, Christopher Hitchens, right, was kind of the exception here. But in many cases, I mean, these were people who were just completely out of their depth. I mean, they had absolutely no idea what they were talking about. And when they talked about politics or philosophy, I mean, they often just sounded like people who thought that, like, I mean, they just thought, well, you can just apply like inductive, reason or whatever. Like, like we can just do everything empirically, and we don't need to, like, there are no domains of inquiry outside of that. And yeah, like, everything can just be kind of explained in a matter-of-fact way, kind of like she's doing in this video. That's really what it made me think of.
Yeah, right. There is a certain feel to this that's like that's the same as what you get when you see, like, a scientist who does popular science stuff being like, I don't know, people have this whole debate about free will and determinism, but it just seems obvious to me, like, that's like, it's that
Right.
same kind of feeling. That it's like, it's like, well, I spent, a couple minutes, thinking about this, while I was, eating my strudel this morning, and it seems like capitalism is fine. I don't know what the big deal is. Yeah, and it is. I mean, the point about the new atheist is interesting. I mean, Hitchens, obviously, I clearly have a giant soft spot for. I wrote a book about, just gargantuan warts and all, but he is the really only person in that crowd who brought this kind of humanistic knowledge, this kind of, this sort of deep sense of, history and politics and all of that to his writing. Even Hitchens, I will say, when he started, like, really getting into, like, philosophical arguments, often, fell pretty flat, but like,
Absolutely.
Certainly it's like, oftentimes it was a pleasure to read him, like, write and talk about some of that stuff in a way that, like, somebody like, Sam Harris, who's a neuroscience graduate student when he started, doing all of that stuff, or Richard Dawkins, who's legitimately impressive as a biologist and science, and like a science popularizer, but like just has, it's just like when he starts talking about subjects that wander far beyond that at all. I mean, like, he's just like this kind of like boorish kind of, middle-aged dude who went to Oxford and carries on about things forever, but, like, doesn't say much of anything that's worth listening to.
Yeah, and I guess just the only other point I'd make on this is, it's not even so much a question of these people, like, not, just like having limited knowledge about
Sure.
certain subjects or whatever. It's actually, like, the problem goes deeper than that. It's a type of scientific rationalism these people come out of, where they actually don't really seem to understand, like, what humanist inquiry is at all. Like, they don't understand the terms of the types of inquiries that people are engaging in. It's actually beyond simply not having knowledge about them.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. Okay, Jake, let's pick it up.
Tend to associate the stunning societal progress we've seen since then to science and technology. But I think that's having it backwards. The driver of all this progress was the capitalist system that allowed an efficient allocation of resources. By resources, I don't just mean raw materials, but also goods and human resources. Capitalism is a system that distributes these resources without anyone needing to have an overview, just by interactions between traders. It's pure genius if you think about it. And that's why science took off, not the other way around. Remember that story about how the Scottish physician Alexander Fleming supposedly accidentally discovered penicillin in 1928 and saved the lives of countless wounded soldiers in World War II? Yeah, well, that isn't really what happened. First of all, scientists had discovered that the fungus penicillium inhibits the growth of bacteria decades earlier. It just wasn't widely known. The British psychologist Burton Sanderson, for example, observed this in 1870 and wrote a book about it. There are also several other written documentations from other people around that time who had studied the effects of fungi on bacteria. Fleming's contribution was that he realized the fungus was shedding a particular substance which he called penicillin, but he pretty much left it at naming the stuff. It wasn't until 10 years later that a group at the University of Oxford set out to find a way to grow the fungus and extract penicillin in large quantities. They then conducted medical trials, and once they were sure penicillin was both safe and effective, their method was scaled up by the pharmaceutical industry. Two members of the Oxford group later shared the Nobel Prize with Fleming. So what saved all those many lives wasn't just Fleming's observation in a petri dish. The game changer was producing the stuff in large quantities and bringing it where it was needed. Innovation and industrialization ultimately going back to capitalism. That's what saved all those people. Capitalism got a pretty bad rep when Marx claimed that it's just about grabbing hold of the means of production and exploiting the working class. Of course, there was an element of truth to his fears because some things went badly wrong during the Industrial Revolution, but that's another story. For today, we just need to know that capitalism, like fiat money, requires a governing institution. That's because someone must be there to enforce contracts should the need arise. That and a few other things, as we'll see in a moment. There are many different ways to govern a capitalist system, and they go by different names like welfare capitalism, or laissez-faire capitalism, or state capitalism. Now, one can debate how well the actions of certain governments reflect the interests of their electorate, if they were elected in the first place, but that's another story. Even so, capitalism has been enormously successful in unlocking societal progress, and the nations who still don't use it, such as North Korea, Cuba, and Laos, are places you don't want to live. We've seen that capitalism is a system that combines markets with governing rules to efficiently distribute resources. This distribution of resources works best if everyone can put forward their offers freely and customers can pick what they want. This is known as a free market, and it optimizes the distribution of resources by competition. Free markets are a beautiful example of decentralized self-organization, an invisible hand, as Adam Smith put it. The way it works in a nutshell is that everyone can trade around until they've got what they think is the best combination of goods, services, and financial assets. If someone doesn't use resources as efficiently as possible, some competitor can do it better and beat them off the market. This idea also goes back to Adam Smith, but later blossomed into an entire discipline now known as microeconomics. Microeconomics is all about how agents, that could be people or corporations or institutions, trade, and how that trade distributes resources where they are most needed. To be fair, microeconomics has some shortcomings when it comes to explaining how we trade in reality, but that's another story. By and large, microeconomics works fine, and several Nobel Prizes have been awarded for it. One of the most important insights to come out of this research area is that free markets only work to everyone's benefit if they're set up properly. Keep in mind that capitalism isn't just a free market, it's a free market plus the governing framework to run it. Free markets do not, for example, work to everyone's favor if some people have insider information, which gives them a trading advantage. This is why we have laws against that.
Do you own your home in New York but still rent your electricity? If you pay more than $50...
if one single company dominates a market sector and can use their power to force customers to stick with them. This is why we have laws against that. And free markets also don't automatically account for externalities, such as environmental pollution. An externality is generally any consequence of trade that doesn't directly affect the trading parties. They can be both good and bad, but it's the bad ones that are the problem. Suppose there's a river going by your house that everyone is free to use. One day a clothing company puts up a factory and dumps their toxic waste into the river. Or the fish die and no one dares swimming in the river anymore. This is clearly not an optimal use of resources, you might say. Why didn't Smith's invisible hand prevent it? The reason market forces didn't prevent it is that the water was free to use. The market didn't know it had any value, so pollution couldn't reduce its value. There are several ways to deal with problems like this. One is to just pass laws that forbid certain actions and punish those who disobey. Or you can put a tax on the pollution so that at least the government has money to clear up the mess. Or you can put a price on using the water. There are pros and cons to all of those, but that's a different story. The story for today is that we have known that externalities can lead to market failures since the middle of the last century. Carbon dioxide emissions are such an externality. For the market to optimize the use of fossil fuel resources, we should have put a price on releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. We did not, and that's why we're now in deep shit. So yes, our current capitalist systems do have a problem with environmental protection, but the reason isn't that there's something wrong with capitalism per se. It's that we didn't set it up correctly in the first place. Basically, the origin of the problem is that no one paid attention to economists. And unfortunately, we still don't pay enough attention to economists. The current situation is that companies who voluntarily produce environmentally friendly goods put themselves at a competitive disadvantage because other companies exploit the environment at zero cost. This moves the burden onto the consumer. If you want to buy a climate-friendly product today, you face extra costs because fossil fuels are cheap and getting to net zero is not. This makes no economic sense, and it'll ultimately not work. It's completely upside down. Products whose production causes damage to the environment, which then requires adaptation and mitigation, should be more expensive, not less expensive. This is why economists have argued for decades that we need to put a price on carbon, and it's why several countries have now introduced carbon taxes or use a cap-and-trade system. To calculate the cost of carbon emissions, one basically needs to evaluate the damage the emissions would cause in the future and then put a price on them. It's called the social cost of carbon. There's a long debate about just exactly how to calculate this, but that's another story.
I saw war. I saw bombing.
And trading schemes only apply to about a quarter of all emissions, and the price of carbon is almost certainly still too low, but it's a step in the right direction. In summary, capitalism has been incredibly successful in advancing society. To the extent that it has caused us problems, it's because we haven't properly used it. The solution is not to abandon it, but to make sure it works to our advantage. There's no simple way to do that, and everyone who claims that the solution is to either discard capitalism or blindly trust it didn't understand the problem in the first place. Microeconomics and financial modeling is completely fascinating. It's basically the mathematics that rules the world. If you want to learn more about how it works, our sponsor Brilliant can help you with this. Brilliant is a fresh and new approach to learning with interactive vision.
All right. I just want to see if we've basically just gone into an ad here for what's left.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it is very seamless. I mean, I guess props to, end a video about how wonderful capitalism is by just kind of sneakily transitioning into an ad. So yeah. All right. I know this is very awkward that it's happening on air. And it's got to be really embarrassing for you because you're a staff writer for a socialist magazine. Like not liking capitalism, liking socialism was kind of your whole thing. But having watched this movie a second time through, I assume that now you're giving up on all of that.
I mean, God, I mean, it was pretty tedious to watch it a second time because I just watched it right before coming on air. But I actually did notice a few things that I missed the first time. One of them, I mean, apropos of the exchange we just had, is that, I mean, like there is something of, you can see like the particular ways she seems to be fascinated by capitalism actually is, or what she thinks of capitalism is in this way that like a scientist would be like, all of us are these rational little agents. We're like cells that are interacting as part of some, organic system. She says that has, it doesn't need any overview. It just happens, almost as if it's like, some grand biological process unfolding or something like that. And the obsession with kind of like microfinance she's getting into, I think, is an extension of the same thing. But yeah, it's a very, I mean, you can see that she has, I mean, I'm sure her science videos are good. She has certain gifts as a communicator and, it's like a well-edited, well-made video, etc. But I mean, the quality of the arguments in it is exceptionally poor. I mean, she brings up probably the preeminent critic of industrial capitalism, only to just sort of, I don't know, she talks about Marx for about like 2 or 3 sentences and then just says, well, some things were true, but also that doesn't, what about all the things that are good as well? And I mean, I think when you get to the end, there is when she says, when with the where capitalism hasn't worked, it's just because we haven't applied the principles properly. I mean, it's a bit like a sort of No True Scotsman thing where it's like everything that's bad is not really capitalism. It's kind of like what happens if you debate a certain type of like intellectually lazy libertarian, right? It's always whatever the thing you're critiquing from the left is, that's never real capitalism. Turns out real capitalism never seems to actually exist. You're not allowed to critique like real existing capitalism. I mean, there were a number of, I mean, God, what do you do with the, science only happened because of capitalism? The idea, I mean, she says it doesn't need any overview. It just happens. And then she proceeds to talk about how, well, there actually needs to be this like overarching regulatory structure. So it's completely contradictory. I mean, I guess she gets into like monopolies a little bit. I think if you're going to do a proper critique of markets, I mean, particularly markets as they exist now, you have to grapple with like the reality that capital concentrates itself, right? Like we're not living in Adam Smith's world. We're living in a world where capital is heavily consolidated. You as an individual consumer, or even as the citizenry of a nation state, in many cases have, I think, limited or certainly very checked power in the face of concentrated organized wealth, organized capital, just literally in the most trivial senses, like you as a consumer, when you think about the power of advertising, right? And like, I mean, there's so many things that she doesn't bring in at all. I mean, the other absolutely glaring flaw I noticed is when she brings up examples of like the few countries in the world that aren't using capitalism. I mean, one of the ones she cites is Cuba, and it's like, why is Cuba poor? I mean, I think the principle.
I mean, whatever you want to say about the like intrinsic flaws of its system, and I don't want to romanticize, that or like ignore actual problems, but like, but like,
what's the main reason that Cuba's poor? I mean, it's
there is also this elephant in the room, or elephant 90 miles away, that has been like sitting on top of it, for since the Kennedy administration, that like its largest natural trading partner, to put it mildly, has had it under economic embargo for Jesus. What are we up to? Like 80 years now? I guess 60 some years. They have there's not to mention, kind of keeping under the state of siege with for much of that time, sponsoring terrorism on the island, having, that there's lots of stuff that's only manufactured in the US. So, you can't get it there. There's lots of attempts to penalize other countries, for what they do in Cuba. I mean, I think, to put it in terms that Sabine should be able to understand, given her interests, we haven't really allowed the experiment to operate under laboratory conditions.
That's right. I mean, and
Oh
again,
my God, Laos. That was one of her other examples.
Right, and both these examples, right? I mean, they call to mind another, another avenue through which one can criticize capitalism that she doesn't engage with at all, which is that, I mean, as we see, it's particularly pronounced with Cuba today. Capitalist power, like the United States, works to strangle, any I mean, capitalism works to erode opposition, like from within, right? If the state decommodifies things, if the state creates social democracy, capital invariably works, against that. Capital wants to commodify everything, and when it comes to external alternatives, if I can differentiate it that way, something like Cuba, right? It's like the United States is going to put an economic stranglehold on that country. So, there are, there are many problems with the arguments in this video, including, as you pointed out, the fact that the first third of it is just about the reality that money represents a form of abstract value, which is not that's
I've been to Cuba. They have money there. I mean, if that's going to be a big argument that capitalism is terrible, just that capitalism is wonderful, that the absence of capitalism is terrible. Just look at Cuba. I don't know what money has to do with that. Not to mention, again, Roman capitalism, Assyrian capitalism. So that's just kind of a giant non sequitur. The thing that the point you just made about social democracy gets to one of my biggest gripes about this video, which is that, she sort of says, and it's funny because she wants to do the Austrian economic style, calculation argument, defense of capitalism. Oh, look, this is just spontaneous order. It just comes together on its own. But then ultimately she's enough of a Euro liberal that she's gonna be like, okay, but you need all this regulation and force. And by the way, citation needed on economists as a profession, having been spending all this time calling for greater action on climate change. But in any case, so she keeps saying, she keeps admitting to all these flaws in real world capitalism, but then her answer is, okay, but that's not a problem with capitalism. You just need a stronger regulatory state to manage the problems that come out of it. But it's okay, but hold on. Is that, in fact, as she says, another story, or is this maybe the same story? Is it maybe that that there's something intrinsic to capitalism itself that undermines those attempts, and this is where it becomes very relevant that as far as I could tell, you've watched it twice, you can correct me, but as far as I can tell, the only appearance of the word class in this video was the couple of sentences about Karl Marx, and so. Again, you would not know what the main, what the objections are to capitalism, other than, the ecological one that she mentions a little bit. But the sort of, when she says, well, as Karl Marx, says that, capitalism seizes the means of production and, exploits the working class. Okay, so she knows Marx uses the word exploitation. She knows that the term means of production comes up somewhere. She shows no signs whatsoever of knowing what the point is, what the analysis is that these terms are being used to illustrate, which is a shame, right? I mean, she could read Capital in the original German and find out. But when Marx is talking about the exploitation is not just a word for treating people badly, which is what she implies, that it's okay, so sure, maybe in the 19th century, sometimes people are treated badly and that's solved with regulation, or maybe even sometimes more recently or right now, to some extent, people are treated badly, but that's because we set up capitalism wrong. We didn't have enough regulation. It's okay, what exploitation means is the use of class power to involuntarily transfer wealth that's created in the case of capitalism by the working class and feudalism by peasants or whatever to the ruling class. Because workers don't own the means of production, capitalists do. So most people realistically have no choice except for to rent themselves out to capitalism, to sell their working hours to a capitalist, because that's the only way that's been made available to them to make a living. The only reasonable way to do that. And so because of that, people have no real option except for to sign away this massive portion of what they produce, right? That's the exploitation, that upward transfer of wealth from the working class to the owning class. And because again, workers don't own the means of production, so they have to go to work for capitalists structurally. And because class doesn't show up at all in her picture of capitalism, that's why she can get away with saying, for every admission of the ecological labor or other horrors of real world capitalism, she could say, well, that's just because we weren't smart enough about the regulation. But that's another story. It's like, no, it's not. It's the same story. The story is that the capitalist class has this built-in incentive to stop, or to certainly resist to a very great extent, to erode, as you say, social democratic and regulatory inroads into its class power, right? So I mean, it's not just like, oh look, it's a shame that people were dumb and they didn't realize that we needed more regulation or better welfare programs. It's like, no, that there are class interests at work in pushing back against that. I mean, even in like the Northern European countries that, more so than the one she lives in, even have like gone the furthest in social democratic directions. There has been a certain amount of neoliberal erosion over the decades because of that entrenched class power, which is just totally absent from the analysis. It's like, you'd think from this that's like, no, the only reason why we don't have that, like, the only reason why we haven't taken meaningful action to prevent climate catastrophe, or why workers and communities are ravaged by deregulated capitalism, is just, I guess, that people haven't watched enough Sabine Hossenfelder videos to understand how we should be doing capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Watching this video a second time, I mean, it's like so much of it is, I mean, she's speaking at a level of abstraction where it feels like she's, and every time something that is potentially significant comes up, she sort of swats it away and says, well, but that's another story. And as you keep saying, I mean, it's all the same story. I mean, you watch this video and so much of it is just her laying out these abstract, principles or kinds of institutions that are kind of inherent in in any economic system once it reaches a sufficient level of complexity. So, I mean, she endorses regulation in a broad idea and like centralized oversight, which again, you have in any system, even like a so-called laissez-faire capitalist one, like externalities, which, at least is gesturing at, okay, well, so there's certain things that we shouldn't commodify in capitalist terms, and just on and on it goes. I mean, right from the beginning where it's like, just 5 minutes about how we have money as an abstract system of value, which, as you said, like people have money in societies that are aspiring
thousands
to be
of predate capitalism by thousands of years. Yeah, for
right.
sure.
I mean, it's just so
and continue to have it in societies that have post-dated capitalism. No, for sure. I mean, that's, again, it's just a huge non sequitur. And I mean, it's funny because, like, okay, you're right. I agree with you. I can see in here that she's probably very good at explaining physics, that you can see the communication skills, but like the actual content of so much of this is really just Jordan Peterson level. I mean, it's she's calmer, she has a more thoughtful demeanor, but like the content of it is extremely Peterson-esque. I mean, it's like well, North Korea seems pretty bad, and I haven't spent even 10 seconds looking into
Right.
whatever else critics of capitalism propose as an alternative. So I'm just going to assume that it's capitalism or North Korea, and and anyway, look at markets at some incredible level of abstraction seem nice. I haven't read Marx, and I'm not going to talk about class at all. And look, capitalism causes scientific science and technological innovation, which one I do like. I saw Plate of Shrimp and floated past at some point, a long while ago in the chat, said if I were going to defend capitalism, the pharmaceutical industry might not be the sector
Right.
that I would bring up as my first example. But like that's not just true because of the many notorious like abuses and horrors of the pharmaceutical industry. It's also like there's essentially, I mean, that's if you wanted to claim that like markets and not just any markets but capitalist markets work in this sort of spontaneous way, without state intervention. I mean, my God, like I mean, it's, if anything, if you look at the numbers about how many drugs are developed in labs that are funded by the National Institute of Health, get public money in one way or another. I mean, this is like the state is already doing the lion's share of pharmaceutical development. It's just that the profits are privatized.
That's right. And I mean, the pharmaceutical industry in many cases inhibits innovation in all kinds of areas, because if your imperative is profit, if that's what's driving you, I mean, you can profit from all kinds of like generic drugs or drugs that are slight modifications of existing drugs that you use intellectual property laws to codify as something separate, so you can monetize them. I mean, there's all kinds of public sector research that is eventually fruitful, but at the time, at the point of its initiation, is very open-ended, because that's how, like, that's the only way you can really, in many cases, drive scientific innovation forward, is through open-ended inquiry. And privately funded scientific research, I think, rarely pursues that, because it's only going to follow the types of leads that are going to create values in the near or medium term for shareholders. Public investment was absolutely essential to creating the COVID vaccines, for example, and
Right.
we would not. Yep. I mean, the way that like the vaccines became synonymous with like these individual corporate brands just completely erases the role of like the AstraZeneca brand, so-called, right? That was created at Oxford University, and Bill and Melinda Gates went and convinced them to to sell it to AstraZeneca instead of making it a people's vaccine. But as the person who made the video said, that's another story.
yeah, exactly. Okay. I know we're running out of time here. The last thing I wanted to mention before you go, we're not going to have as much time as I hope to talk about this today, but a while ago, this is not as recent as the other articles that we mentioned that you've written, but you wrote about the Doug Burgum of New York Times columnists, David Brooks, and I would actually, yes, David Brooks thinks class has more to do with where you eat than where you work, and all of these guys are just kind of a endless source of entertainment for me. Like I just someday somebody's going to have to break down for me the process by which people get jobs as New York Times columnists, because it seems to be sort of capricious, and it also seems to be like lifetime tenure, that you can just like spit out whatever comes into your mind onto the page and get it printed in the most coveted op-ed space on the planet. But since we were just talking about class, just very briefly, how does David Brooks think class works?
Well, writing this article was interesting. I mean, because obviously it was prompted by this ludicrous like food tweet David Brooks did, where
Yes.
he tweeted out this, this meal just cost me $78 at Newark Airport. This is why Americans think the economy is terrible. And it's like, people were able, I mean, God, the internet really is terrifying. Like people were able to triangulate like the exact, like just knowing that he had a burger and fries at Newark Airport, people like found the restaurant, they found the terminal, they found the menu, and they calculate, obviously it's not $78, right? Although if you look at the top, like of the photo, he's got this, this glass of whiskey, which,
Which, by the
whatever
way, is my biggest objection to that photo. That if he was drinking $50 whiskey and with ice, like, because that glass is full of ice, like that's just kind of criminal in itself.
Yeah, that's right. That's not how you treat good whiskey. But anyway, it's interesting because, I mean, like Brooks later sort of apologized and said, oh, it was just a joke. I mean, I don't think you need to, I don't think it's very difficult to deconstruct what's happening here, right? It's like I don't know, he'd had a couple of whiskeys. He's thought, oh, I'll do something that it's funny and it'll seem like relatable. And like, maybe if we want to give Brooks, like if you want to have a charitable reading this, he thought that putting the whiskey in the top of the photo was kind of like, that was the twist. News Bank, look at me. Yeah. I'm an out of touch, like New York Times column. I think maybe that's too generous, but if we want to have a, more charitable reading of this, the thing is though, this sent me down a real rabbit hole with David Brooks and the subject of food, because it turns out he's for 25 years or something, he's been writing about class using references to all kinds of generic cultural signifiers, but I would say principally food. And so, it really, I mean, there's a lot that could be said here. Lots of funny passages from old David Brooks articles, where he would go on these safaris. Like one of them, I think, was after the 2000 election. These kind of articles where like a coastal journalist does like an exotic safari into the hinterland, right? And then, guess what? What they see and what they write about is exactly what like a coastal patrician who never goes outside of like a place like, Manhattan already thinks a place like, in the Midwest is. And,
Yeah.
and it's like, in many cases, like there was a really good like fact check of one of these articles I found from a few years later. I'm not forgetting the name of the writer. But it's cited in the piece. But I'm basically everything Brooks said about this particular county in one of his pieces. Like it just doesn't stand up to even the most basic scrutiny. Like he's pretending there's no fancy restaurants and things like that. Again, it always comes down to food, and it's like there absolutely is. And it turns out that one of the fancy restaurants that didn't exist in this county is one Brooks himself later stayed at. It was an expensive bed and breakfast that he stayed at shortly after he wrote the article. So there you go. There are a lot of funny examples, and like, I don't know, maybe you can link to the piece. I don't want to go through them all here, but I mean, what this really comes down to is a real tick among a certain kind of conservative, and I think, to be fair, a certain kind of liberal as well. You saw these sort of pieces really flourish after Trump was elected, where there was an instinct among some editors at places like the New York Times, like, oh, we didn't see this coming, so let's get out of our bubble. And I think in a few cases that sort of thing led to decent journalism. I think in most cases it didn't. I think in most cases it led to things like these articles Brooks has been writing for years. And what this comes down to really is the idea that like class divides, which is fundamentally what Brooks thinks he's talking about in these pieces, they just come down to cultural signifiers, right? They come down to like, for someone like Brooks, really the working classes actually have like deficient values. They're not sufficiently aspirational. They're caught up in these defective cultures of, I don't know, having too many children or eating bad food or, whatever it is. And, credit to Sean Goody, I think it was, or possibly Mike Utrecht, who came up with the headline for this piece. I did not come up with this, but it sums this up perfectly. David Brooks thinks class has more to do with where you eat than where you work. And I really think that says it all.
Yeah. And I mean, it's funny. I guess I was thinking about this, and the last few weeks, I guess a month tomorrow, right, since the sort of beginning of the latest outbreak of violence in Israel Palestine at this level has really put a lot into perspective. I mean, there are all these right wingers who, I mean, I've been, certainly on like social media, I've been following, a ton of like big right wing accounts since way back when I was doing like the weekly debunk segment on the Michael Brooks show. And, look, I dislike quite a few of these people, for obvious reasons. I kind of despise some of them, they're, but I've really never felt as viscerally disgusted with all of them as I have watching their reaction to ethnic cleansing happening in Palestine. And and similarly, on the, I don't know, I guess the sort of centrist liberal sphere, um, people like David Brooks, who are given this, like, again, incredibly coveted op-ed space for just like no apparent reason, have who analyze the world around them with just like incredibly little genuine curiosity about how any of it works, when they're doing these safaris into Trump country to try to analyze whatever they think the white working class is, where it's like probably some guy who makes $1 million a year owning his boat shop, but like has
Right.
listens to country music, so that's what David Brooks thinks is the working class. It's like it's very, it's like, yeah, I mean, it's sort of easy to make fun of, and that's the appropriate reaction, but like that, like seeing him apply this kind of same the same lack of curiosity, the same sort of impulse towards blaming who's ever at the bottom for for not trying harder not to be, to a situation as grisly and gruesome as what's going on right now in the Middle East has been particularly bad, right? So the last thing I wanted to yep touch on for just a moment is something that he wrote in the last month. So I think we have a graphic for this. Yeah, so it's the mischance for peace, and in here he's basically taking the opportunity of the IDF going on this spree of bombing apartment blocks, refugee camps, hospitals, churches, mosques, ambulances, convoys fleeing from the parts of Gaza that they ordered people to evacuate from, where they ordered well over 1 million people to leave their homes, denying them food, water, medicine, rebuffing, even the sort of pathetic requests, from the Biden administration for a humanitarian pause. What all of this apparently inspired in David Brooks was some thoughts about how sad it is that Yasser Arafat, when he was still alive, didn't take the opportunity to make a peace deal with Israel. That's what he thinks would have really prevented all of this. And if you read the article, he kind of goes through this standard story. I mean, in a way, the kind of difference between like reading something by Ben Shapiro about Israel Palestine and reading David Brooks on Palestine is very much like the difference between watching Jordan Peterson defend capitalism and watching Sabine Hossenfelder defend capitalism. It's like very much the same vibe difference and very much the same continuity in a lot of the actual content, right? So says the and he says, he talks about the collapse of the peace process in 2000. He says there are a million complexities. Yes, there's so many complexities. and many errors made by Israeli, Palestinian, and American sides along the way. So much blame, just spiraling out in all directions that there's really no point trying to track any of it down. But this offer points the way to the sort of fair solution negotiators have been struggling their way towards for many years. It's hard to see this kind of option ever being on the table again, and the Palestinians let it slip away. This memory comes hauntingly back because the misery that Palestinians and Israelis are now enduring did not have to happen. They could have reached some sort of moderately effective arrangement, which would have given the two nations a chance to pursue their own destiny. Another reason I think back on this history is the way a simplistic oppressor-oppressed, colonizer-colonized, apartheid Israel narrative has been imposed on this conflict. The real history is much more complicated. It's the story of the Palestinians who were offered a state in 1947 that the Arab states opposed. More recently, is the story of flawed human beings on both the Israeli and Palestinian sides who are confronted with a devilishly complicated situation. And he goes on to basically blame Palestinian rejectionism for the whole thing. So it's like he does, this is different from the Daily Wire version in that he sprinkles all of this reference to complexity and nuance and flawed human beings. He doesn't have the sort of on the surface anger that you would have there, but the basic point that it's that like this is all the Palestinians' fault because Yasser Arafat wasn't willing to make enough diplomatic concessions 23 years ago, or various Arab states that like the Palestinians had nothing to do with didn't accept a deal on their behalf in 1947. Is the same basic narrative. I mean, it's the same basic view of the world you get in the Daily Wire version.
Yeah, I mean, I would call this, nuance mongering. This is it's I don't know, a very sort of this affected complexity he's adopting here to, I think in this case the intention is to create the impression of a balanced historically informed perspective. But the effect is in fact to I don't know, erase the egregious injustices of the present. And I think that's the only reason why, Brooks would write something like this. I mean, you said you want to talk about Brooks's recent article, and there were two others I came across. I'm not sure which, I wasn't sure which one, but yeah, at least one thing I will say for the one you just put up is he didn't seem to reference Thucydides anywhere, which is the classic David Brooks movie. Managed to keep old Thucydides out of this one.
Yeah, that is interesting that David Brooks does that. Yeah, he has in some of his other stuff that he's written about the Middle East in the last month, which in a way is like, it's kind of interesting to see that in the New York Times columnist, because that's more kind of the National Review sort of move, that.
Yeah. Well, that is where he started. So.
Yeah, fair enough. Like they love that. That's like the Victor Davis Hansen, all those guys, it's like you basically just take like the content of like a Facebook Uncle rant and like sprinkle in a little Herodotus or something to show that you're smart. And, it's like, oh, I'm done. Here you go. Yeah, I mean, it just like, it just seems like what should be obvious is that if you're sort of, if you're writing this story in a way that somehow manages to assign power and agency to everybody except the actual nation state that holds all of the power in this situation, then you're probably missing something, right? I mean, this is like that somehow somehow the country that has been occupying the West Bank and Gaza for the last 56 years and has caged a population of mostly refugees in Gaza and blockaded it, and is engaged in this like Serbia and Kosovo level campaign of destruction there right now. Somehow they're just kind of like, this history just sort of happened to them, right? Whereas the Palestinians, who we're not even talking about a state doing the decisions. It's just like this sort of category, the Palestinians, have all this power that they could have, that they could have wielded, and they just should have made more concessions at the right time. Never mind that, even if you think that one deal in 2000 was like, which fell well short of Israel's obligations under international law, not to take, territory by force, et cetera. It's just like, what? Like, okay, so let's say they could make a deal. So Israel couldn't have unilaterally withdrawn. Israel couldn't have just given citizenship to everybody who lives within its current borders. They just had no options. And, I think that says, that kind of says everything about this. We are pretty seriously coming into time here. So I guess I'll just end with this. You should read Luke's writing. There is a link to his Jacobin page down below. You should also, especially for the stuff on centrism we were talking about, read his book, The Dead Center, which is very good. I blurbed it, so check that out. Thank you so much, Luke, for joining us today. And I think let's just play out. Jake, do we have the Griscom clip?
I'll just say this. At a certain point, we all live our lives and we get sort of pulled into certain things, right? By our environment, by our community, family, things like that, right? Like everyone has had like kind of political positions that they may have, inherited or been taught. But a very simple test that you can take to see that if this political project, right, is worth supporting is to maintain this system, to maintain this dream. Does it mean dropping bombs on refugee camps? Does it mean holding millions of people in an open air prison? Does it mean denying people water and food? And we're not just talking about the ongoing siege of Gaza. We're talking about the daily life of Palestinians in the West Bank, in Gaza, and also what's going on with Palestinians who live inside of Israel. If your political project regularly puts you in a position where you have to apologize for crimes against humanity, for mass slaughter, for mass degradation of other people's humanity, you should take a good long look in the mirror and ask yourself, what the fuck am I doing right here? And that's sort of it at the end of the day. I mean, really, if you are in this position regularly, where you are having to deny atrocities like people who support Israel are having to do today, you got to take a real long look at yourself, friend.